Welcome to Community Insight, the news that brings you above and beyond the scope. I'm Andre Hollywood-Evans, and today our special guest is going to be discussing some of his political aspirations for the town of Brookline, but not limited to Brookline. And we're going to be talking about his vision overall. And please welcome State Representative Tommy Vitolo.
Andre, thanks for having me on the show. Delighted to be here on Brookline Interactive.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedule. I want to start first with, your office is working on legislation for public accountability and transparency for charter schools.
That's right.
I'm going to elaborate on that.
So, as you know, charter schools are public schools.
Yes.
Our state and our local tax dollars pay for those charter schools. And in fact, if a young person lives in the town of Brookline but goes to a charter school outside of Brookline, it's still the Brookline tax dollars that follow that student to that school. They're public schools. We also have a traditional public school system with a school committee, and those state and local tax dollars educate most of the students in Brookline, for example.
Okay.
The public has opportunity to engage in the traditional public school decision-making process. They elect the school committee, and then the school committee meetings are published, and the public's welcome to attend, and there are moments when the public is actually encouraged to speak up and participate and comment. And that transparency and opportunity for the public to be engaged is important, and it's reasonable because it's the public dollars. And so it's not just the school committee. The budget itself is public and shared widely. And the policies are public because it's a public school.
Right, right.
Now, charter schools are receiving public money. They're treated like public schools under state law.
Okay.
But they don't have an elected school committee elected by the general public. They're not obligated to have public meetings in the same way that what we call public schools are obligated to. And the general public doesn't have the opportunity to look under the hood, see how their tax dollars are being spent, and participate in the decision-making about those tax dollars. And so if you want to be a private school and get private money and make private decisions, that's cool. We have wonderful private schools in Massachusetts. We also have wonderful public schools in Massachusetts. Charter schools are kind of like somewhere in between. And my view is, if a charter school is going to receive state and local taxpayer dollars, then they need to allow transparency access to the general public who is paying for it. And so my vision under this bill is that the public would have access and opportunity to engage in charter school budgets and decision making similar to the way they have access and ability to engage with the public schools. This is a bill that I inherited from my predecessor, Representative Frank Smizek, and we're going to keep on working on it and try to build up traction and interest amongst my colleagues in the legislature and try to get it across the finish line.
Okay. Very interesting. Now, my question is, what is your take on everything that's going on in our school system? Like, thank God that there's been no school shootings in Massachusetts that I know of. What is your take on the gun laws in terms of trying to provide a better secure system for our schools so our kids can feel safe, teachers can get back on the job?
Yeah, so, we hear from folks who are firearm aficionados that the problem's mental health. It's mental health.
Right, right.
They don't acknowledge that it was Ronald Reagan who cut mental health funding and released, 40 years ago, all sorts of patients who needed mental health treatment onto the streets. But nevertheless, we're here today. There's no question that improved mental health would reduce, but not eliminate, mass shootings, school shootings, no question. But you know what else would help reduce school shootings? Less access to guns.
Yeah,
we know that to
true.
be true, right? And so the House earlier this session passed a gun safety bill. And the Senate also passed a gun safety bill. They're not identical, as is typically the case, right? The House has some good ideas. The Senate has some good ideas. They're a little bit different. So those bills are in a conference committee right now.
Okay.
Where some members of the House and some members of the Senate are trying to find a compromise bill that gets the best of both languages and will bring us to the floor for a vote. I'm optimistic. I can't guarantee, but I feel it's likely we'll get that bill to the floor before July 31st. The House and Senate will support it. Governor Healey will sign it, and we will have a safer gun law system in Massachusetts. Now, the details, I can't tell you exactly what they're going to be. There's definitely some progress on what are called ghost guns, which are guns without serial numbers, harder to track. But part of the House bill includes legislation that I authored with Representative David Linsky. And I got the idea for the legislation when I was at the airport. And I was at Logan, and I was, you take your stuff off, you put it on the belt, right? And for whatever reason, I got flagged, and they pulled me out for additional screening. Who knows, right? Maybe I should have shaved that day. I don't know. But while I was standing there, I was speaking with a TSA agent. I said, listen, if this conversation's out of line, let me know. I'm happy to not have it. But I'm a state representative in Massachusetts, and I think about gun laws. And you deal with this all the time. I said, how often does somebody intentional or inadvertent, bring a firearm through TSA? Right? You guys catch them. Like, how often does it happen? And he laughed. I said, no, really? He said, well, it depends on where we are. So I used to work in Florida. It was multiple times a day. In Logan, in my experience, he said it's about once a week. And I said, do you think it's on purpose? He said, no. People forget. And I said, what kind of responsible gun owner is waiting in line at TSA where there's signs everywhere that say no guns allowed? We all know it.
Yeah.
And forgets that they have a firearm or ammunition in their duffel bag. He said, they're not a responsible gun owner at all, I suppose. And I said, I think that's right. So I drafted a bill with David Linsky that said, inspired me, that said, hey, I don't have a problem with responsible gun owners. My problem is with the irresponsible gun owners. They're the ones who are causing all this trouble.
Yes.
How do we identify them? Well, one way we identify them is they bring a gun past security at TSA, or they try to. Whether or not it's intentional or inadvertent, if you've lost track of where your firearm is, you are not a responsible gun owner in my view. And so there are certain places we, as society, know you can't bring a gun. You can't bring a gun in the airport.
Right.
Past security. You can't bring a gun in a courtroom.
That's right,
past security, right? And there's a Second Amendment right, but it doesn't extend infinitely. There are limits. And so I said, well, we can expand that. You shouldn't be able to bring a gun, in my view, into a polling location on the day of an election. It's intimidating. Our democracy is too important for that nonsense, right? And frankly, there's a police officer there. So if you want to give me the security argument, come on, there's a police officer right there.
Right.
And so similarly, schools, right? Absent a specific reason to have a firearm on a school, you have no business bringing a gun in a school.
No, you're right.
And there are some specific reasons that are legitimate, and we carved out some exceptions. But generally speaking, it's not a place for guns. Now, it's true. If you're really committed to bringing a gun in a particular location, you might well accomplish that. But by making it really clear what our societal expectations are, number one, some people won't do it. Some people are persuaded by the law, whether it's doing right and wrong or it's the punishment that comes with it, right? And it gives our law enforcement officials clear guidance on what to expect and what not. And so if they suspect someone has a firearm in a place they ought not have it, they'll pay a much closer attention to that person, right? And it reduces the frequency, it reduces the likelihood of these, avoidable tragedies from happening. I grew up in a town called Brookfield, Connecticut.
Okay.
Now I live in Brookline, Massachusetts. The town next door to Brookline is Newton. The town next door to Brookfield is Newtown.
Interesting.
Newtown, Connecticut is where Sandy Hook is. Kids I grew up with had children at Sandy Hook on the day of that school shooting. Now, thankfully for me and for the friends I grew up with, none of them had children who were killed or harmed. on that day, but it's raw. It's close to home.
It is.
Literally, Sandy Hook is 4 miles from the house I grew up in.
Wow.
Right? And kids I went to school with had kids who were there.
Wow.
And so I don't have all the answers. None of us do.
Right.
But I do know that the young man who shot up Sandy Hook should not have had access to guns. And
That's true. Or have
we as a
access to their
society
premise.
actually knew that.
Right, right.
We understood that, but we didn't have policies in place to keep his hands off of that firearm. And every circumstance is different, and
Yes.
there's always going to be a what about. And I don't think we can eliminate all potential for school shootings, but I think we have every obligation to reduce the likelihood, reduce the frequency with the tools that are available to us, given the Supreme Court that we have. And so I'm hopeful that this gun bill passed by House and Senate will come out of conference. I'm hopeful that it includes the sensitive spaces language that came from the bill I wrote with Representative Linsky. And I look forward to voting for it on the floor because I believe it will. It's one more way to make us a little bit safer with respect to gun violence, which, along with violence from automobiles, these are the two things that are killing young people in America.
That's true, yeah.
And close to home. So that's with respect to school violence with firearms. I think that's what we I hope can accomplish this term. And Massachusetts has excellent firearm laws relative to other states.
Okay.
And the rate of violence from firearms, homicides, suicides, and accidents is lower than nearly every state, perhaps except Hawaii. But I'll tell you what, it's much higher than an awful lot of other places that have the kind of wealth and education that Massachusetts has. And there's no reason why we can't continue to strive to reduce that violence, reduce those tragedies. And I'm going to join my colleagues and continue working on that.
Because most of the bills are passed through the Senate, then it goes to the House, and it goes back to the Senate. Musical chairs, if you will.
Yeah, well, so the House and the Senate operate relatively independently. We have joint committees where we're going to review the bills together,
Right,
but then
right.
the House and the Senate are independent.
Okay.
And-
And that's bipartisan, am I correct?
Well, so the Democrats have a supermajority in both the House and the Senate. But I'll tell you, it's not like the United States Congress. In my experience, my Republican colleagues in the House behave themselves. And the Democrats, with respect to the Republicans, generally behave themselves. We're not taking shots at each other. Look, the Republicans aren't going to get the keys to reproductive health care. The Democrats aren't giving them those choices, right? We're not. We have difference of opinion there, and frankly, the Democrats are in the supermajority for a reason. The voters in Massachusetts want us to be making that decision. But there are plenty of Republicans in the House and the Senate who are productive in participating in the debate, in shaping the laws. Now, look, again, it's less likely that my Republican friends in the House are going to shape the law around access to abortion as they are going to shape the laws around prevention of cruelty to animals, which is sort of less a blue and a red issue, right? They're picking their spots, to be sure. But we don't have the kind of acrimonious relationship with Republicans in the Massachusetts legislature that you see in the federal legislature. And I'm thankful for that because I've got plenty of colleagues who are Democrats who I love and love to work with.
Yeah.
And I've got more than a handful of Republican colleagues who I love and I'm happy to work with.
Okay.
I'm not going to stop believing in what I believe as a progressive Democrat. But so long as they're on the side of moving things forward and being fair-minded, I welcome the input. Just like I welcome the input from voters of Brookline, regardless of whether or not they're pulling a red lever or a blue lever, whether or not they were with me or with my opponent in the last primary. Hey, I represent everybody.
Right.
That's how this works.
Yes. Oh,
And
yeah.
I think that's really important. So, with respect to the gun bill and the other bills, the House is going to act, the Senate is going to act. Sometimes one goes first, sometimes the other goes first.
Right, right.
But if we both can figure out how to pass a substantially similar bill, then we go into conference and try to find a language that we can both be happy with. And then we've got to vote that language, each side.
Okay.
And then the governor's got to decide to sign it or veto it, and we go from there. With a Democratic governor, Maura Healey, I'm more confident that what comes out of the legislature will be signed rather than vetoed. But Governor Healey, she's doing a great job.
Yeah.
You know, she answers to the voters directly.
Right.
She ran on a set of issues. She has a set of values, and if the legislature ain't quite getting it right from her view, she might veto something. She might say, I want it a little differently. And then the House and the Senate and the governor, we're going to have to figure that out.
And you're also working on legislation for health care, for insurance coverage for fragile students, well, certain ones.
That's right. So it's a pretty narrow bill. It only affects, only relates to several dozen students, but it relates to the school districts themselves. And so fundamentally, every child has a right to a public education. Public education was invented in Massachusetts, in Boston. We believe in it. We believe in it legally and we believe in it morally. And every student is every student. And it's taken America a long time to figure out that all means all. Even in Massachusetts, it's taken us a long time. And maybe we're still not quite there, but we're getting closer and closer, right? And so these several dozen students that are relevant to this bill have severe medical challenges. Some are in constant pain, some thankfully are not. But these are young people who cannot survive without professional support 24 hours a day. So when they come to public school, they come with a team to motivate them, to move them throughout the building, to make sure that their organs are behaving properly, to make sure that they're nourished, to make sure that they're comfortable, to make sure that they can then learn from their teacher and their classmates and do the work and grow. And it's true, very few of them are likely to go on to be heart surgeons, but we got plenty of heart surgeons. Most kids who go to school are not likely to become heart surgeons.
True.
That's
true.
okay. They're entitled to an education. We're going to make sure they get one the best we can. But here's the thing. The way that the state law works today with public education is after insurance, it's the local school district that has to pay all of that cost. And the problem is the difference between having one student and 0 students with this kind of condition that we're talking about could be $1 million in your budget. $1 million. Brookline's school budget is something like $160 million.
Wow.
$1 million is a lot. We're educating thousands and thousands, I don't know, 8,000 students, right?
That's about
$1 million is a lot. And so it's my view that rather than asking the local district to cover what's not covered by insurance, number one, we should get insurance to cover more. But then number two, the state should cover that cost so that if the student moves from one district to another, their budgets aren't flailing around wildly. The school should be financially indifferent to one of these wonderful young people who have so many challenges in front of them arriving at their district. $1 million is 10 teachers. It's the salary of 10 teachers, more or less, right? So if a school has a balanced budget and one of these students shows up, they're faced with the prospect of laying off 10 teachers.
That's not good at all.
That's not good at all. It's not fair. It's not fair to the other students. It's not fair to this student. It's not fair to the educators. It creates this tremendous instability. And so if this bill is passed, we will kind of stabilize the budgets of the municipalities because to the state with a $60 billion budget, we can handle $1 million moving around here and there. We're not made of money, but we can budget that. And the fact of the matter is that student who maybe lives in, for the sake of argument, lives in Newton one year And Brookline the next year, if the state is paying it, they're budgeting that money no matter where that student lives. It doesn't affect the state budget if the state is covering it. But for the Newton and the Brookline budgets, it would throw them out of whack. And so this is about protecting the student and trying to meet our commitment to educating everyone. And it's also about supporting municipalities, school committees, school budgets, so that they have some more stability and they're not thrown out of whack by chance, by something that they can't control.
I mean, we just had a teacher strike, what was it, 11 days in Newton or something like that? It finally came to an agreement. What is a fair assessment for a teacher's salary in today's day and age, the way things are?
You know, it's easy for me at the state level to say, to acknowledge all of the positive things that are easy to say about teachers. They're so important.
Yes, they are.
I can rattle off the names of public school teachers who were important in my life. Just in August, I was with my daughter back in Brookfield, where I grew up, and I took my 4th grade teacher out to breakfast, June Gordon. Right?
Okay.
She was my 4th grade teacher in, I don't know, 1988.
Wow.
She's now a principal at the school, and she's still dear, sweet, wonderful Miss Gordon. I can't call her June. I just can't. She's Miss Gordon to me. She will be my whole life.
That's understandable, yeah.
So it's easy for me to say, give the teachers everything, and schools should be palaces. But it's the local taxpayers and the local school committee who have to provide all of that education, provide all of that support, wages, benefits, working conditions for teachers and educators, and provide and make sure we have those schools for all of those students. They have to make that budget balance. I don't have to make that budget balance.
Right.
So it's easy for me to say, teachers are so important, give them everything, because I don't have to figure out how to make it work. The local school committee does. And you know, there's a tension in Brookline right now because the World Languages program, which exists because of an override Brookline passed about 15 years ago, where we agreed to raise our own taxes higher to create a World Languages program for public school students before high school. Right? The idea is if we start them earlier, they will be better at Spanish or some other language beforehand.
Okay.
We're going to cut that program because we can't afford it anymore. We also, just 2 years ago or so, signed a contract with the teachers that raised their salaries. Well, the amount of money that Brookline has to pay salaries on any given year is fixed. And if each teacher is getting more, we can afford fewer teachers. And so this is the challenge, is if we're going to raise salaries and we don't have a source of the revenue, we can't pay as many teachers as we used to be able to pay. And so we're seeing the prospect of laying off teachers or not rehiring those who retire, in part because we raise salaries faster than we raise the budget to pay those salaries. And that's a real challenge because municipalities don't have the ability to just raise whatever tax they want whenever they want. There are real constraints that go back decades in Proposition 2.5.
Wow. But for those of you who are just tuning in, you're watching Community Insight. If you have any questions or any suggestions, perhaps you want to be a guest on the show, please log on to our website at thebeantv.com. That's thebeantv.com. You can also check us out. And we're on Mondays at 2 p.m. on Channel 15, most of your local stations. And we're also on the Brookline website, brooklineinteractive.com. .org. So, but unfortunately, we run out of time. I want to thank my special guest, State Representative Tommy Vitolo, for sharing his wisdom with us. And we'll see you again next week. My name is Andre Hollywood Evans. Thank you for watching this edition of Community Insight. Have a blessed and prosperous week.